Along with a bunch of fantasy football videos I'll be doing throughout the 2014 season, I'll also be doing weekly fantasy football sit start videos for weeks 1 through 16. Why not week 17? Because if your league has a championship game in week 17, then your league is stupid anyways and is irrelevant to me. Now, with these, keep in mind that, I'm not going to sit there and just go with the easy ones. Start LaShawn McCoy or start Peyton Manning. I'm trying to help you looking deeper, finding some quarterbacks that you're on the fence about that you should sit, quarterbacks that you should start, and going on and on through the positions. And that's what I plan to do here. And also give you some weekly advice in these videos about who you should maybe consider picking up off of your league's waiver wire. But let's get started by talking about the quarterbacks. Quarterbacks to sit. Cam Newton of the Panthers taking on the Buccaneers. 1, we don't even know if Cam Newton's going to play because of injury. 2, even if he does play, we don't know how effective he's going to be. 3, you don't know what he's going to have in terms of the weapons around him and how they're going to play out of the gate. And 4, you don't know what you're going to get out of the Buccaneers defense under new head coach Lovie Smith. A lot of warning signs here saying stay away from Cam Newton in week number 1. Same thing to me with RG3 of the Washington Redskins. He didn't look very good in the preseason. Yes, he's got a lot of nice weapons around him, it looks like, but I expect the Houston Texans at home to play well defensively. Might not be the right week for RG3. And again, we're talking about week 1. It's a lot of uncertainties, so you want to play it safe as much as you possibly can. Quarterbacks to consider starting. Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the New Orleans Saints. He's got Julio Jones healthy. He's got Roddy White healthy. Harry Douglas is there as well. I expect the game to be high scoring, maybe a shootout. As a result, Matt Ryan's going to throw the ball a lot. He's got these weapons, these nice weapons on the outside. I expect him to have a big day. You look at Jay Cutler for the Chicago Bears taking on the Buffalo Bills. While I expect the Buffalo Bills to have one of the better fantasy football defenses in 2014, the fact is the Chicago Bears probably will be one of the highest scoring offenses in 2014. And as a result, I expect in this opening game, the Bears and Jay Cutler to show a lot on the offensive side of the ball, similar to how they started off the 2013 season. So I think Jay Cutler, in a lot of leagues, he's probably available on your waiver wire. If you've got Cam Newton there and you're not really sure, you're in a pinch for this week, maybe go pick up Jay Cutler and roll the dice with him. And now we move on to running backs. And keep in mind what I'm talking about here with week 1 in terms of sit and start. I'm trying to play it as safe as possible because we're basing it off of preseason and expectations and projections. So we really don't know a lot. And I think in some ways you want to kind of play it safe and make sure that you don't get bit in the butt on if you don't know exactly what's going to happen with some of these guys and how they're going to be used. Looking at running backs to sit, Le'Veon Bell of the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Browns. We don't know how the timeshare is going to work out with him and LeGarrette Blount. Are some of his goal line touches going to be vultured? Is it going to be a pure time split? There are probably better options out there than Le'Veon Bell in week number 1. Shane Vereen of the New England Patriots taking on the Miami Dolphins, kind of the same situation. Andre Ellington of the Arizona Cardinals taking on the San Diego Chargers on a Monday night game. We don't know if Ellington's even going to play. If he is, how effective he's going to be with this foot injury. Again, there are probably better options out there for you. Don't take the chance of hoping he's going to play because you drafted him super high, and then he hangs you with a goose egg. Running backs to consider starting this week. Ben Tate of the Browns taking on the Steelers. You're talking about a guy that's going to get a lot of opportunities, a lot of carries. He's going to be a 3-down back, probably catch some balls out of the backfield. Might give you a nice, pleasant surprise. Bernard Pierce of the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Bengals. Talk about a Bernard Pierce who I project to be a very nice fit for Gary Kubiak's zone blocking scheme. As a result, he might have a nice day against the Cincinnati Bengals defense. And then Chris Johnson of the New York Jets taking on the Oakland Raiders. Now, I could sit there and say that a Chris Johnson could be in a similar type of timeshare, but he's also facing the Oakland Raiders defense. So this is one of these things based off of matchups that you say it might be a worthwhile gamble in week number 1. Now we move on to the wide receivers, and a lot of times this is about opportunities, matchups, all of that plays into account. Wide receivers to consider sitting this week. Keenan Allen of the San Diego Chargers taking on Patrick Peterson and the Arizona Cardinals. I don't like that matchup. I think there are safer options for you in week number 1. Reggie Wayne of the Colts taking on the Broncos. You really don't know how he's going to be as a 35-year-old wide receiver coming off of major knee surgery. So maybe wait a couple of weeks to see what you got in him. Don't potentially get stuck with a goose egg in week number 1. Mike Wallace of the Dolphins taking on the New England Patriots, potentially having to go up against Darrelle Revis a lot of that game. Again, the matchup is not very good. Now we go to the flip side. Wide receivers to consider starting in week number 1. Marquise Lee of the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. If the Jaguars fall behind early, they could be throwing the ball a lot. With Cecil Shorts being out for week number 1, Marquise Lee figures to get a lot of targets early and often, and he could have a nice productive day for you in week number 1. Marcus Colston of the Saints taking on the Atlanta Falcons. He has a very good history over the years against the Atlanta Falcons. And I think he's fully healthy and ready to go, and I see no reason for that to change at all in week number 1 in 2014. And then I think a must start if you have him in your fantasy lineup this week is Emmanuel Sanders of the Denver Broncos. The Indianapolis Colts secondary is not all that particularly good or deep. You figure Demaryius Thomas will probably draw Vontae Davis in coverage. Emmanuel Sanders is going to get a lot of targets and opportunities, especially if Wes Welker being gone due to suspension. Emmanuel Sanders could have a really nice kind of show-me performance in week number 1, and that's why he probably has to be a must-start for you. Now we go to tight ends and ones you should consider sitting. I look at Zach Ertz and Jordan Reed. Ertz of the Eagles taking on the Jaguars. You don't know how many opportunities, how much time he's actually going to be on the field in that offense. It's maybe one of those things you're better off waiting a week and seeing what happens. You're better off maybe risking losing some points as opposed to taking the risk of getting no points from him. Similar thing to Jordan Reed. You need to see how the distribution is going to work with RG3 in that offense with guys like Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garcon. Furthermore, going up against a Houston Texans defense that I expect to be potentially a top 10 unit in the league this year, the matchup isn't all that particularly great. Tight ends to consider starting, though. Scott Chandler of the Buffalo Bills taking on the Chicago Bears. The Bears linebackers are terrible in pass coverage, as are their safeties. This is going to be a common recurring theme for most of the year until proven otherwise. Whoever's tight end is facing the Bears that week, I'm probably going to recommend that you start him because based off of what I saw last year and what I saw again in the preseason, this is going to be a huge area of concern for this team all year long, meaning a guy like Scott Chandler could have 5 or 6 catches and a touchdown and really have a surprising week for you. And then Jared Cook of the St. Louis Rams taking on the Minnesota Vikings. I think the Vikings will struggle a little bit to match up with tight ends, especially early on in the season. You're also talking about with Sean Hill. He's going to need to throw to a guy like Jared Cook. I expected Jared Cook to come out and have a very nice season-opening performance for you in your fantasy lineup. So I'd rather take a risk on guys like Scott Chandler and Jared Cook, both guys who are probably available in a lot of your fantasy leagues, as opposed to guys like Zach Ertz and Jordan Reed, who are probably drafted in most of your leagues. And lastly, we move on to defenses and special teams. We don't worry about freaking kickers. Okay, that's ridiculous. Defenses to consider sitting. Buffalo going against Chicago. I expect Buffalo to be one of the better fantasy football defense and special teams units in 2014, but week 1's probably not going to be the best week for them. Then San Francisco taking on the Dallas Cowboys. San Francisco could dominate the Dallas Cowboys in a lot of ways, but the Cowboys could still gain a lot of yards and still put up a lot of points, especially in garbage time. I want to stay away from the 49ers this week. Defenses to consider starting. I look at the Houston Texans taking on the Washington Redskins. The Redskins offense didn't look very good in the preseason. Now you've got J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney and the Houston Texans front seven. It could be a rough day at the offense for the Redskins, so you might want to consider the Houston Texans. And the same thing with the Detroit Lions taking on the Giants. We don't know what the Giants are going to be able to do in terms of protecting Eli Manning, what they're going to be able to do in terms of the running game. The Detroit Lions, with that front four, that could really generate some heat and some pressure. They might be able to get in Manning's face, get some sacks, force a couple of turnovers. Golden Tate in the return game might be able to pop one. I think Detroit might be a worthwhile start for you in week number 1. All right, so now I've talked about some of the sit-start stuff. Let me look at your waiver wires, and I'm using this based off of Yahoo and percentages owned, what have you. But let me give you some players to look out for at wide receiver, running back, and tight end. Guys you should either maybe put on your watch list or consider even acquiring and dropping one of your players. Let's start off at wide receiver. There's some rumblings that the NFL and the Players Union could come up with an agreement for a new drug policy. As a result, that means that Josh Gordon might not be suspended for all of 2014. Right now, as of this recording, Josh Gordon is only owned in 44% of Yahoo leagues. And I'm sure it's similar across the board. I guarantee you have a fucking scrub wide receiver or running back. You have a stupid-ass backup quarterback or kicker or defense that you could easily part ways with to take the chance of adding Josh Gordon to your lineup, hoarding him on your bench, because even if he only plays half the season, you're still talking about a guy that led the league in receiving yards last year. it is worth the gamble. Don't be stupid. Pick up Josh Gordon while you still can. Marvin Jones of the Bengals, he's going to be out a few weeks with a foot problem, I believe it is. But this is a guy who was clearly the number 2 receiver for Andy Dalton in that Bengals offense last year. He's only owned in 23% of your leagues. So he's a guy that's maybe worth picking up and stashing away for a little while. Jordan Matthews of the Philadelphia Eagles only owned in 30% of leagues. You're talking about a team with Jeremy Maclin as one of their wide receivers. It only seems to be a matter of time before he goes down. You're looking for a rookie that can come off your waiver wire and give you some big production in the second half of the year. Jordan Matthews, by God, might be it. In terms of running backs, I look at Jonathan Stewart of the Carolina Panthers. Thought I would never say this. Only owned by 28% of Yahoo leagues. And you look at Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams is over 30. Jonathan Stewart finally looks like he's healthy. This could finally be the year where he takes over and becomes that lead running back. And you figure in over 70% of Yahoo leagues, probably 70% of leagues across the board, he's sitting on your waiver wire right now. And I guarantee you at some point in time this year, you're going to have a running back get benched or a running back get hurt or a running back underperform. You're going to need somebody. So maybe this is a guy, especially if you're struggling at the running back position for depth or even starters at all. This is a guy worth taking a gamble on. Same thing with Sean Green. You know, he's owned in 32% of leagues. Right now, he's a starter for the Tennessee Titans. While I don't think he's going to be the horse all year long, for the moment he is. And that's almost 70% of leagues he's not even owned in. A lot of you probably have crappy running backs. Here's a guy that's guaranteed to start at least in week number 1. Get you some carries, get you some touches. Go get him. And then if you're looking for like a super deep sleeper later on in the year, Jonathan Grimes of the Houston Texans, only owned in 6% of Yahoo leagues. You're talking about a guy here that's the primary backup, as far as I know, to Arian Foster, a guy who has a history of having trouble staying healthy. If Foster goes down, Grimes steps in. He's the guy. These are the type of players that get opportunities later on in the year via injury or via just opportunity in general that help you win fantasy football leagues. These are the guys that you need to be paying attention to. These are the guys that you need to think about picking up right now. Same thing at tight end with Garrett Graham, owned in 23% of the leagues. He's the number 1 tight end for the Texans. Go get him if you need help at tight end. Travis Kelce of the Chiefs, owned in 35% of leagues. That means 65% of the leagues he's not. If your number 1 tight end is kind of weak and you don't know what you're going to get out of him, then maybe it's worth stashing a Kelce. Maybe he becomes your number 1 tight end, has like a Jordan Cameron type of breakout year, or at least he goes into your flex position in bye weeks. But again, a stash and save kind of guy. Again, these are all guys, some of them especially, and namely Josh Gordon, that you should entertain the thought of picking up right now, especially Josh Gordon. Don't be stupid. So again, as I mentioned, I plan on doing this every week of the 2014 NFL season for fantasy football. Weekly sit-start videos. What I also want to do, and you guys could track along with me to see how I do in terms of performance, compare the people that I told you to sit versus the people that I told you to start on a weekly and maybe monthly and yearly basis, and see how good or bad my advice is. Because if it's really, really good, I feel like that helps establish some credibility. And if it's really, really bad, then maybe it's time for me to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But nonetheless, and like I said, keep in mind every week, I'm not going to go with the easy slam dunk picks. I'm not going to be talking about the Peyton Mannings and the Aaron Rodgers and the Drew Breeses or the LaShawn McCoys and the Jamal Charles, the APs. I'm trying to find those real critical decisions and lineup choices that can help determine whether or not you're going to win or lose your particular fantasy football matchup in a week. So thanks for you guys for watching. And like I said, check back all year long for more fantasy football videos from me here on the Schleg Daddy TV channel.